the Jüdische Frauenbund. My name is Rebecca Voss. I'm a professor of Jewish history here in Frankfurt, and it's my honor to moderate this first session. We're hearing the three papers one after each other, and then afterwards we're going to have a panel discussion. Our first speaker today is Leo Zwicker. She's a professor of history at Indiana University at South Bend in the United States. She completed her undergraduate and graduate work at the University of California in Berkeley. Professor Zwicker works on gender, everyday life, and social change in modern Germany. Her book, Dueling Students, Conflict, Masculinity, and Politics, 1890 to 1914, appeared in 2011 with the University of Michigan Press. More recently, she has focused on the history of emotions, pioneering Jewish women in Central Europe, and the first generation of Catholic women leaders in Germany. And currently, Professor Zwicker is drafting a book on Lena Morgenstern and her family in 19th century Breslau. And today, she's going to speak about Paula Ollendorff and the League of Jewish Women in Breslau. Please, the floor is yours.
Good morning. So today I'll be speaking about Paula Ollendorff and her work in Breslau for the Jewish Women's League. My main subjects are listed here on this slide. So I'll discuss Ollendorff, some of the League's work in Breslau, the idea of leadership concentration and Ollendorff, and then a brief comparison of the Jewish Women's League and the Catholic Women's League. So now I need to go forward. Yes, all right. So my recent research focus has been on Breslau. And for this conference, I decided to focus on Paula Ollendorff, whose many titles suggest an almost impossible number of engagements in diverse parts of Jewish life. And through her, I had hoped to gain a deeper understanding of the city of Breslau and the kind of activities that brought together Jewish women. So the purpose of this presentation is to better understand the qualities and beliefs of Ollendorff and how they helped her rise to become a leader. It gives insight into the Jewish Women's League on the ground in Germany. And this paper brings together insights from Paula Ollendorff's writings and speeches, records from the Leo Baeck Institute archive, and on the Breslau local chapter of the Jewish Women's League, and secondary sources, especially an article on Ollendorff by Michael Meyer, and a book on the history of welfare in Breslau by Mirosława Lenarczyk. So the larger project that brought me to Jewish life in Breslau is a book project that focuses on 5 sisters from the 19th century. So Lena, Cecilia, Jenny, Anna, and Clara, who we don't have a picture of, who worked in diverse parts of the women's movement. These sisters died in the first decade of the 20th century and missed the growth of the local chapter of the Jewish Women's League. But I think they might well have joined the League because of their diverse work in local organizations. And Lena Morgenstern is listed in publications of the Jewish Women's League statutes as an honorary member. In 1910, the Silesian city of Breslau, now Wrocław in Poland, had the 3rd largest Jewish population in Germany. And I show this picture here of the Neue Synagoge, the Reform Synagogue, and also the way that its presence here in the city as well, as an example of the importance of the Jewish community in Breslau. So Breslau was home to less than 1% of the total German population, but a surprising number of the leaders of the German women's movement were connected to the city, as this 1895 image reveals. 3 of the 10 women pictured here and described as leaders of the German women's movement had an association with Breslau. And even more remarkable, in a city where Jews made up only about 5% of the population, 2 of these 3 women were Jewish. Lena Morgenstern is number 4, so she lived between 1830 and 1909. She's the second of the 5 Bauer sisters that I'm writing about. Another Breslau native, August Schmidt, Number 6, a Protestant who lived from 1830 to 1902, co-founded the General Union of German Women, together with Henriette Goldschmidt, 1825 to 1920, who's Jewish. And Goldschmidt's family resided in a little village in Posen, but they followed Breslau politics intensely. They picked up the Breslauer Zeitung from the Evening Mail and read it together each morning at breakfast. So other activists who hailed from Breslau included the Women's League for Conservative Judaism in the United States, Mathilde Roth-Schechter, as well as Bertha Barth-Strauss, who published many articles on behalf of the Zionist cause. Breslau Jewish women also distinguished themselves in scholarship. So you might know the names of Clara Immerwahr or Edith Stein, who also came from Breslau. So let me turn now to Paula Ollendorff, and let me begin with the words of Bertha Barth-Strauss. She opened her obituary for Paula Ollendorff with a memory from her own youth and walking down the streets of Breslau. Barth-Strauss remembered that her mother said, "Take a good look at that woman," whenever I encountered Paula Ollendorff on the streets of Breslau, "for she may be the cleverest woman I have ever known." And Barth-Strauss continues, "We were all proud of her, we Jewish women from Breslau. She was one of the first, it seemed to us, in that early generation of pioneers for women's education and women's work, who never forgot work for the community alongside all the passionately pursued and fought for intellectual development." Ollendorff's facility with languages helped shape this impression. Sources claim she was fluent in 6 languages, and at international conferences, she could simultaneously translate and produce language at such speed and with such elegance that in some cases her words were perceived by her audience as more compelling than the original. Ollendorff lectured widely across Germany and in the United States on a wide range of cultural topics, including Shakespeare and Goethe, Spinoza, Martin Buber, Hermann Cohen. And her daughter was an accomplished pianist, and Paula Ollendorff was also known to have a wide-ranging knowledge in music and the visual arts. She was born in 1860 in Kostenblut, and now Kostomłote in Poland. It's a village about 40 kilometers from Breslau. And one obituary describes her as coming from, quote, quite a humble Jewish family. She was one of 6 siblings and was said to have maintained deep and close ties with her siblings throughout her life. She graduated from Augusta School and then studied at Bertha Lindner's Teachers Seminar, and then spent time in Budapest and London. In England, where she spent several years, she honed her English, learned about English practices of social work, and made connections that served her into her 70s. After her time abroad, she returned to Silesia in 1887. At the age of 27, she married Isidor Ollendorff, a lawyer, and became the mother of 4 children. A son, Friedrich Ollendorff, served on the Central Welfare Office of German Jews in Berlin. A daughter, Helene Ollendorff-Kurt, became an pioneering research scientist in the United States. But central to her life was the loss of her 2 other children, her son Heinz to an accidental poisoning when he was age 15, and a daughter Lizzie to the repercussions of her service as a nurse in World War I. And these deaths, together with her husband's early death in 1911, left her with periods of deep depression. In the obituaries that described her life and celebrated her, they described her as channeling the grief over her losses in her family into her work and service in Breslau. And many of those plans began, as Ernst Moring, who worked with her in the German Democratic Party, remembered, with discussions in her own home. And these were serious, creative, and even unforgettable debates and discussions. Ernst Moring describes her focus on her plans and the world of ideas, a focus that left her less interested in what was supposed to occupy women, her appearance and her home. In the debates in her home, the atmosphere was so concentrated on the problems at hand that, in Moring's words, quote, no one took offense, unquote, to her, quote, run-down clothing or, quote, short-cropped hair, which was unusual at the time, or the strange, outlandish, uncomfortable furniture that had come from a Polish castle. In her life, Ollendorff combined an impressive knowledge and understanding of languages and cultures with a determined ability to bring new projects to fruition. Even as a child, she dreamed of helping children in need, and even establishing children's homes for orphans. And by the end of her life, 6 institutions had been created in Breslau and Silesia with the help of her work and leadership. And 2 of these institutions ended up being named for her, and obituaries attributed the success of these institutions to her determination. So as Jüdische Jugendheim, das Haushaltungsschule, Lehrlingsheim, Mädchenheim, Kleinkinderheim, and Kinderlandheim in Flensburg. In these institutions, she was able to make concrete her desire to help young people, to help children in diverse ways. And in addition to helping to create these organizations, Ollendorff was active in all different kinds of organizations in Breslau and beyond. So she was a member of the National Governing Board of the Jewish Women's League, and she became vice president in the 20s. She was elected to the Breslau City Council as a representative of the German Democratic Party, one of the first women elected to a city council in Germany. She was a member of the Liberal Association in Breslau. She was on the governing board of the World Union for Progressive Judaism. She attended the first meetings in London that led to its creation. She was on the governing board of the Association for the Protection of Jewish Endangered Persons. Together with Jewish community leaders, she helped create the modern Jewish Welfare Office in Breslau. She represented Germany at the first and second World Congresses for Jewish Women. They were in Vienna in 1923 and in Hamburg in 1929. She was the first woman to be elected to the governing board of the Jewish community, and she was named a community elder, the highest honor the Jewish community could bestow. She also traveled widely, gave lectures widely, and this chart just shows her lectures in 2 months after a visit to the United States. So lectures on being, on Jewish life in America, on social work, and on women's work in America. These, and I also made a map. So all of these lectures that she did in October and November 1927. And then here's a map of the different places that she traveled to give lectures. So back to Breslau, in the local chapter in Breslau, Paula Ollendorff shared leadership with Beate Gutmann, who was the president of the local group of the Jewish Women's League. So she was Beate Gutmann was actual president. And Gutmann turned her attention inward to the local chapter. She served on 8 of the Jewish Women's League's 13 commissions. So Ollendorff's work was more public-facing, and Beate Gutmann's work was more focused on the community. And here's a list of these commissions of the Jewish Women's League, the Ortsgruppe in Breslau. So the Beratungsstelle was kind of a first stop for families in need, so figure out where to direct people to get help. And then the other commissions offered assistance to diverse groups in the community. So, for example, opportunities for young men and women to socialize or to help young women with the resources they needed to marry. Ollendorff served on 5 of these commissions and was chair of 2 of them. And so again, because of her many commitments, right, the most important were on the Breslau City Council, the governing board of the Jewish community, the governing board of the Jewish Women's League, so the national governing board, and then the governing board member of World Union for Progressive Judaism. I think she could be a good example of what sociologists call leadership concentration or even leadership monopolization. And as Ollendorff herself in her articles talked about the importance of the Jewish Women's League, she was really emphasizing the importance of education, of changing hearts and minds. And as I learned about Ollendorff, I was kind of wondering how a concentration of such leadership roles in the hands of one person was consistent with this ideal. And also in a lot of her accomplishments in professionalizing social work and reforming institutions to serve the needy, she's not necessarily drawing in average members into the work of the Jewish Women's League. So when I also saw Ollendorff's choices as perhaps different than Beate Gutmann, who again is the president of the league in Breslau. And here's one of the things that she did. She formed the Society of, or the kind of Association for Women Pensioners, one of the groups that more directly involved average members. So in the difficult years of the 1920s, the group brought together 60 or so retired women who met 3 times a week for tea and conversation. And during the worst times of the inflation, the organization was also able to offer a small daily meal to help older women get through the period. They celebrated Jewish holidays. They created, wrote, and acted in plays together. And we want to remember that in the 20s, a lot of older women would have to rent out their rooms in their house. They may not have money to heat their house at night. They may not have light. So they would have to sit in this cold, dark house. So having a chance to go and interact with other people must have been like really meaningful. And I thought to myself, like, these kind of informal ties and creation and connections could really bring people together, could help create hearts and minds. But actually, the literature from sociology suggests that like leadership monopolization or leadership concentration could be really effective in creating change, especially if the goal is bring together resources to create new institutions. So by simultaneously serving in the city council, the Jewish Women's League governing board, in the board of the Jewish community, she could use her network, she could bring groups together, she could create trust to help to convince leaders to find the necessary resources to help make change. So rather than activating and educating members of the Jewish Women's League, she was trying to reach beyond the members of the Jewish Women's League to young people, right, to offer concrete ways for them to create community. And again, if we think about the different institutions that she helped to create, really are kind of thinking about that next generation. So from this distance, it's really kind of hard to tell what accounts for this leadership monopolization model in Breslau. Because women were not perceived as capable of leadership, it might have made sense to put forward the most impressive and accomplished women to negotiate with men in roles like on the city council and in the Jewish governing board. And Paula Ollendorff's just incredibly impressive education and knowledge made her have seemed worthy of leadership to Jewish men, right, in this period in which Bildung was so important and so emphasized. It's also possible that others were simply not willing to kind of step up to do the work associated with leadership roles, or maybe they didn't feel like they could or had the skills to take on these leadership roles. And the records of the Leo Baeck Institute also reveal some personality conflicts between Lily Ligner and Paula Ollendorff. And Ligner describes her as high-handed and capricious, that suggests that Ollendorff may also just have chosen to concentrate power in her own hands. So we don't really know about that. I think Professor Kaplan did an interview with Lily Ligner, right? And that's also in the records of the Leo Baeck Institute. So at some point, I hope to chat with you about that. So writing by Paula Ollendorff suggests that she understood the benefit of highlighting particularly impressive women in leadership roles and the connections between leadership roles and claims for equality for women. So Ollendorff worked for women's equality in the Jewish community. She was a strong advocate for women's right to vote in general in Germany and also within the Jewish community, so the active and passive suffrage within the Jewish community. And she was instrumental in the passage of a resolution at the Second Conference of the World Union for Progressive Judaism in 1930. And that resolution stated that women should be on a footing of perfect equality with men as regards to marriage and divorce. In a 1927 article, The Visible and Invisible Jewish Women's League, Paula Ollendorff offered a powerful description of the impact of work for women's equality. Ollendorff argued that the Jewish Women's League, the numerous areas of social work and assistance, had deeply impacted the Jewish community. So the Jewish Women's League work has been absolutely essential. Things like, right, these new institutions that were created through the Jewish Women's League. And so in Ollendorff's words, this educational work is visible to all. But Ollendorff claims that the activities of the Jewish Women's League also have, quote, invisible effects. The ambition and the success of women in their new sphere has the potential to transform the ideas and expectations about women more generally. And those who witnessed how women could help those in need, educate community members, find solutions to complex problems, could not deny women's intellect, ability, and potential. In this way, in her words, right, so there's the visible and the invisible in the Jewish Women's League. Just as the currents in calm lakes work invisibly in the depths, the power of this female influence streams beneath the surface, molding the worldview of both men and women and of society at large. To sum up, in Ollendorff's view, the Jewish Women's League offered models of impressive women whose personal qualities had the potential to shift the understanding of women's capabilities more generally. In this approach, the Jewish Women's League offered a viewpoint in common with the Catholic Women's League, which was founded in 1903. And in this last part of my talk, I'll just compare the Jewish Women's League and the Catholic Women's League. So I can see many similarities between the Jewish Women's League and the Catholic Women's League. So the desire to highlight women's power and potential, the goal to organize women's work across many different areas, a focus on professionalizing social work and charitable assistance, a desire to deepen the faith, deepen the religious commitment among members, a goal of creating new opportunities for collaborations with secular women's movement organizations. But there were also some key differences. So leaders of the Catholic Women's League, they wanted to reach out to Catholics who were interested in the women's movement more generally and who might be lost to the Catholic Church if some kind of Catholic women's movement was not offered to them. In the 1920s, the Catholic Women's League had 200,000 members, which made it 4 times as large as the Jewish Women's League. But with a population in Germany about a third Catholic, it's a lower percent of members. Catholics were much more likely to join local mothers' associations, young women's associations, or Elizabeth associations that were led by priests. The Catholic Women's League was modeled on the People's Associations for Catholic Germany and saw itself explicitly as a women's version of that organization. And at least what I can tell from Breslau, while the Catholic Women's Union was aimed much more to basically just try to bring together the efforts of the already really dense network of existing Catholic women's organizations and serve as an umbrella. In the Breslau chapter on the ground, the Jewish Women's League concentrated on its own initiatives that had come from the Breslau chapter itself. And then just a final point of difference, the Catholic Women's League was really based in teachers, a profession mostly closed to Jewish women. So to sum up, this presentation is focused on Paula Ollendorff, whose personal accomplishments helped make her a leader and respected figure within the Jewish community. While the concentration of leadership roles in her hands meant fewer other women could have the experience of leadership, it may have helped lead to the success of her initiatives. This presentation has also begun to sketch out some similarities and differences between the Jewish Women's League and the Catholic Women's League, a topic that could be the subject of future research. Thank you.